welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today we are continuing our series on tennis parenting. This is part 2, and we're going to discuss the educational needs of parents as they get involved in the tennis journey. If you want to catch up, you didn't get a chance yet to listen to our first part, which was on the difficulties of tennis parenting, go back to episode 208, take a listen to that. But today we're going to discuss the educational needs of parents as they move through the tennis journey with their kids. And Josh, I think, when we talk about the educational needs of parents, one of the key points, and again, let me maybe reiterate that we're basing a lot of this on a paper written by Sam Thrower, Chris Harwood, and Chris Spray, Educating and Supporting Tennis Parents, A Grounded Theory of Parents' Needs During Childhood. The authors are from the UK, so some of their findings are, really more surveying and research in British tennis, although some of those things probably still hold for American tennis, Canadian tennis, other Western countries, etc. So we can, figure some of that out. But one of the things that they found in terms of being able to help parents was that the parents had to be willing to learn. And I know I'm pretty sure you've done some parent talks for tennis. And I'm guessing that the parents who come are not necessarily the parents who need it.
Yep.
Yeah. Could you just talk a little bit about your own experience, like in some of these groups and what you've noticed?
Yeah, I think that when when the option goes out at a tennis club or tennis facility to for parents to learn, to get involved, to learn about maybe different techniques that they can use, the parents that choose to attend, because obviously it's not obligatory, is are generally the ones who are eager to learn, eager to get better, don't have maybe an ego about this, and instead are just looking to improve. And the others, which is generally a large portion, don't. And I think maybe that means that they feel like they know best, or they don't want somebody else telling them how to do things. So I would agree with that it really is, unfortunately, the parents that attend, and I think everybody can, pick things up or benefit from it, but I think the ones that need it most are often not there, just like you're saying.
Yeah. I've been in somewhere, like USTA New England would say it's mandatory for all parents to come, but there's not a lot of enforcement that they can do. But sometimes those other parents will come, but the sessions tend to be a little bit more acrimonious at times, or they're noticeable distractions. So I think, even when we work with a client, the willingness to learn is a big part of the work, regardless.
Yep.
And being open-minded about that. So let's go over the high-level areas of education we're going to talk about, and then near the end of the episode, we can also kind of put in some of our own thoughts based on experience. So these are the different areas of education that we're going to go over. So reasons for involvement in tennis, why tennis? We should talk about that with parents. The financial and time demands of the sport, especially as it goes on and on. Knowledge of tennis, knowledge of the sport, how to play the game, how to score it, etc. Perhaps one of the more confusing aspects of junior tennis is understanding the whole developmental system, from the small court, different colored balls, all the way to yellow, and then local, regional, national, or, in Europe, it's maybe going from, say, the UK to Tennis Europe to the ITF, those things. And yeah, and then I think after that, we'll just kind of talk about some of our own particular thoughts. So this is not necessarily a new topic for us to talk about, Josh, but let's discuss it in the context of helping parents with why tennis? What what are the reasons we should get children involved in tennis? So I'll let you kind of take that one first and see where we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of reasons, and reasons we've talked about in the past, right? It's an individual sport, which encourages athletes to be self-reliant, to take responsibility for their results, to obviously the dedication, work ethic piece. So I think there's a lot of reasons, and I think yes, starting helping parents start with that why, or start with some of the deeper reasons, I think is really important. Obviously, there's unique challenges to the sport, both physically, where you have to obviously have speed and strength and endurance over long periods of time that are, I think, unique to a sport like tennis, but also psychologically, right? The fact that again, it's individual, the athlete has to be their own umpire or line judge out there. They have to handle those ups and downs emotionally over often long periods of time. And there's also also socially, it's I think unique from a lot of different sports where, yes, there might be certain team elements, right? Whether it's certain tournaments that are in that team format or uh, junior team tennis through USTA or high school or college tennis, USTA league, USTA league tennis when people become adults. But in general, the social aspect of the sport is different, where it's you're competing by yourself, but there's all these other kids around, right? You're training with them, you're going to tournaments, maybe with them, or at least seeing them at tournaments. And the socially, obviously, there's certain challenges with that in terms of the comparison piece and in terms of, you know, things like that. But I think that there's also certain aspects of that can be appealing, right? Where it can almost be like everybody's sort of working towards the same sort of goal together, even though it's not necessarily a shared team. Everybody has that sort of shared mission. So those are I think some of the different reasons for maybe why tennis, but I think, yeah, parents being clear about that and maybe having conversations with their kids about that can be really clear, can be really important too. And I think it's also important that, kids have at any age have some sort of autonomy about what sport they decide to get into, right? That it's not being that the sport that their parent picks is not being imposed on the kid, right? So it shouldn't be just the parent picking a sport. It should be either some sort of collaboration or maybe the kid is somehow leading that process or showing some sort of interest. Maybe the parent is introducing the kid to certain sports and maybe the parent has some sort of background with tennis in particular. But no, I think it is important that there's some autonomy there.
For sure. I mean, although there probably are some stories in which, say, parent picked this and it worked out great. I mean, you could think about like the Williams sisters. I'm pretty sure Richard Williams selected tennis and they went with it. But on the whole, I agree with you. And I think I like this particular educational topic because it requires parents to constantly check back in with why tennis. What was the purpose of getting my child involved here? And you really honed in on sort of the idea that we're developing the whole person, right? A biopsychosocial approach to this. And as we've said a few times on this show, if you think about it, tennis is an absurd activity. We're hitting a pressurized yellow ball over a net between lines. That's kind of, yeah, it's absurd. So why are we getting so upset? Not only as players, but as parents, watching somebody hit a ball over a net between lines. So there, we really have to keep that in mind. Like, what's the real reason we're doing this? And it is to develop that whole person. It is to develop the child so that they can become a fully functional adult. And tennis challenges, athletes, I think, in ways that perhaps other sports don't. As you mentioned, the
Yeah.
self-reliance piece, the necessity of being fair and respectful, the necessity of being able to coach yourself, through adversity. A lot of other sports don't put those pressures on young players. The other thing I think is good to keep in mind for parents is that I would love if a parent gave tennis as almost like an unconditional gift to their child, meaning there's no ROI that you demand, there's no results that are necessary here. Um, can we give this sport as a gift to the child so that they can try to do something they enjoy doing, they have fun doing it, they grow through it, they meet lots of other people, they get in better shape, and maybe, just maybe, they become great at it. And then what we hope is that they pay the gift forward with their kids, and so on and so on and so on. So this shouldn't be seen as we're investing in this and we need you to win matches or putting on pressure. I think if it's looked at as an unconditional gift, and if the child continues to enjoy it, great. But both you and I know, I mean, we're not top pros in the world in terms of like playing, but tennis has served a real positive like role in our lives, professionally, socially. You've moved around a little bit throughout the country. Hasn't tennis always been kind of like a great way for you to plug right in to a community and just start meeting people?
Absolutely. No, it really has. And it's, from the time I was, yeah, in middle school, it's been, I've made friends through tennis. I've, moved to, yeah, different states, different parts of the country for different opportunities involving tennis, whether it be coaching or different sorts of things. And then, yeah, getting involved and playing on my own as, it's as I've moved to a new place, it's like, okay, well, where am I going to play tennis here, right? And in certain states and certain places, that's easier to find than others, right? I mean, first of all, just weather, in terms of weather, right? There's certain states where you can obviously play outdoors year round, other states where just based on the weather, you have to play indoors for a period of time, and some areas are, more accessible that with indoor tennis than others. So it's, but that's always a top priority. And I think, yeah, tennis has sort of given me that built-in community in a lot of ways. So I think there's a lot of benefits to that. And I think about you look at any tennis facility and you see people from ranging from really young children of 4, 5, 6 years old through older adults in their 70s, 80s, 90s. And I've seen that at every facility I've either worked at or played at. And it really is. I think even being able to emphasize that piece of it being a lifetime sport, I think is really key in terms of, why tennis, right? It is that lifetime sport. It is a sport where you can see a 12-year-old and a 65-year-old playing together on the same court, having a good match, by the way. And we talk about some of the maybe some of the negative sides of UTR at times, but that's actually something that I don't, maybe we don't see that as much in UTR tournaments these days, but I think the idea of it was almost to democratize the sport in certain ways so that, somebody sort of regardless of age and gender could play on the same court, just, that are approximately the same level. But yeah, I mean, I think in response to what you said in terms of the demands of a parent and sort of that ROI piece. I agree. I think it in certain ways it goes against the way that a lot of people do view it, where there are significant financial and time demands that parents have to undertake, right? I mean, the 10-year-old is obviously not driving themselves to the tournament or not paying for their own coaching or their own tournament fees. So, that does fall on the parent. And, a lot of parents really get involved in that process. And I think you mentioned in the last episode, almost, they can almost take on that sort of manager or agent role for their kid. Um, and I think sometimes when the parent is so involved, they feel really invested in their kid's results, where it's like, hey, we're putting all this into our kid, and so we have certain expectations that come along with that. And we can also talk more about this because I think certain expectations are beneficial, right? Expectations maybe in terms of behavior, in terms of sportsmanship, in terms of work ethic, pieces like that. But I think where people get themselves in trouble is that, having too many expectations on the result piece, or falling into, traps in terms of comparisons or things like that. And sort of letting this idea of some sort of return or some sort of ROI on that time and financial investment that's being made, maybe overshadow the whole process or cast doubts about somebody's progress that they're making.
Yeah, because if we're going into this with the purpose of we need to get a college scholarship or we need to win, we need to be a pro, the journey will probably go poorly, or at least not very in a very healthy way for the player. So that's why I think the idea of an unconditional gift works better. And as you said, maybe I might not use expectations. I might use standards, like let's
Yep.
maintain a high standard on some of those things. But I think that's 100% right. Um, so before we move on to some of the other things, Josh, let's take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Go Sport, GEAU Sport.com. And just to remind people, so Go Sport's a family-owned business in the US. They specialize entirely on gear bags, so racket bags, duffel bags, backpacks for tennis and, dare I say, pickleball as well. And these products are made with premium fabrics and materials. They're great stuff. And Josh, I know that you got your Axiom 209 racket bag this past week, so I wanted to just hear a little bit about what you've noticed.
Yeah, I was excited to receive it. It's really, really nice. Really, we can just tell the quality that goes into it. And, I think it's also just cool seeing all the different compartments, all the different areas you can use. Obviously, you can put rackets in there, but there's a section for shoes. There's, a section where you can put your phone, wallet, and keys, all these different sections where it's easy to really stay organized, right? I've had situations in the past with bags where it's just a big,
Big
a
mess. Yeah.
area, big mess, and it just turns into a big mess. Exactly. There's no, sort of separation where you can put different sorts of things. And yeah, I think this will, certainly help on the organization front. And then, if your bag is organized and packed well, that's, it's one less thing to worry about when you're out there. You know where to find something during that 90-second changeover. You're not digging through your bag trying to find it. And yeah, I can tell it's a bag that I'm gonna, have for a long time just because of that quality. So yeah, and I know you got yours as well.
Yeah, so I've had some fun kind of packing it and seeing where I can put different things. I tend to be a player who has a lot of stuff,
Me too. Me too.
just through experience, lots of injuries or whatever. So just trying to put that stuff away. I really like the way it stands up on its own. I like the way it feels on my back when I put the straps on, and carrying it around as a backpack. So I'm super excited to use this, as I start playing a little bit more this spring and get in some tournaments in the summer. So, if you're a player who's looking for a tennis bag, check out the Axiom series of bags. You can go to gosport.com, GEAU sport.com. And Tennis IQ podcast listeners get a 10% discount on Go Sport products. So you can use the discount code TennisIQ10 at checkout. So please visit gosport.com today, GEAU sport.com. All right, Josh. So you started to talk a little bit about the financial and time demands, and this is something that going into the process. And I think one of the things with as we educate parents, we would really prefer to do it from the beginning of the tennis life cycle. Early on, maybe in some of those developmental stages of, again, depending on where you live, but in the U.S. we might be playing short court with a red ball. and then maybe we transition to orange, and that there's a different court for that, and then green, and then yellow. We would love to get parents to be starting their educational journey much earlier, maybe than say the 14s or the 16s, and having them understand what the financial and time demands will be as their player continues in the sport, and maybe even as they get better and better is an important part of this. Because if they do pursue the sport, we both know it doesn't get cheaper, because now maybe there's more travel involved. Maybe there are more coaches involved. So, and this is where, coming back to the discussion on ROI, as players get better, maybe more of that pressure and expectation comes up. So when you think about talking to parents about the financial and time demands, maybe they have a 10-year-old, what are some things that you want them to know?
I think I think there's a number of different things. I think helping them understand that, yeah, as you know, if their kid does want to pursue this long term, that it changes, right? That, you, especially if they're playing at a high level and they're playing, national tournaments, they may have to travel further. Even if they're, playing within their section, depending on, some of the sections are much larger than others. Like I think of like, yeah, certain sections are much larger where, just drive, you can't just necessarily drive for a couple hours to a tournament. It's maybe 5, 6, 8 hours away. You have to get a hotel for, at least a night or two, and, or you're flying places. And so just helping them understand the demands, but also, parents are giving up their weekends or maybe even, their weeks at times. So helping them understand that. And, are there other options? Sure. Maybe a coach brings the player at times. Maybe certain parents are friendly with each other and one parent brings, the other parent's kids to that tournament. But yeah, I think just helping them understand and be realistic about what that actually looks like, I think is important. And then there's other things other than just tournaments, right? I mean, training, right? With whether that's private lessons, whether that's group clinics, whether that's, different match plays. So the costs and the time demands on those as well. So just, I think, helping educate them on that whole process. And I think, there's often some sort of education that takes place, if we want to call it that, between parents, right? Where the parents talk, parents sort of maybe educate each other or talk about their own experiences. But yeah, I think having some sort of formalized education sort of from the start. And to me, I would actually compare it to the same sort of journey that an athlete goes on, right? Where I think Brian, you would agree that rather than having a kid start playing their sport, deal with some of these different trials and tribulations, maybe have certain challenges that they encounter on the mental side of the game, and then start working on it at a later point, maybe years after they start being competitive, treating the mental side of the game as a critical piece sort of from the start, I think tends to be a, much better option. And I think the same is true with parenting, right? Being intentional, being deliberate with how we go about this process rather than waiting years on for certain challenges to emerge and then having to address them.
Yeah.
Being able to sort of build that foundation instead of, and being proactive about it rather than being reactive based on different issues that might pop up.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. And I think, when we talk about the financial and time demands, that it's important for us to connect back again to the why. If, let's say, you're a parent and you agree with my perspective that this should be an unconditional gift, what's going to happen is you're going to get sucked in to results and how much you're investing and so forth. And other parents are going to be operating in a different way. And there's going to be sort of a social peer pressure around that. And can you stay strong to realize that why we're spending this money? And understanding that it's not about results. This is about the development of my son or my daughter and through this sport. Um, and so our support financially as well, but also, through love and support should not be conditional based on performance. Um, but this is tough. We live in a society that, ties money to results. And it's not a society that necessarily looks at paying things forward as a means of doing it. But that is what I would ask for parents to consider, so that they part of the role, I think, Josh, of the parent on the performance team is to reduce pressure, not increase pressure. And obviously, parents always have great intentions, but the execution of such intentions is not always where we need it to be. So I think that's what we're trying to get through with these first two about why tennis, and then understanding the financial and time demands, is that we keep these two things in sync so that the player isn't having going onto the court with this need to do something. And it has to be more like, all right, what do I want to do today? What are we learning today? What's our goal today? So yeah, so that's a tough one, but I think the more people can get their heads around, this is what the expenditure is gonna look like if my child plays for the next 8 years. And you'd be okay with that, because it doesn't get cheaper as they get better. It most likely will continue to get more and more expensive. So the next area that we want to talk about is parents and having a solid knowledge of tennis. Many of the parents, I'm sure that you work with, Josh, don't play tennis. Never did. May not have even been athletes. And then there are probably some that are players. Maybe who knows what the level is. And then maybe some of them have been really very good players. Why is it important, you think, for parents to have a knowledge of the game?
So I just wanted to go back to one thing from the previous section about the financial and time demands, and then definitely we can get into that. So one thing that I just wanted to mention, because I think you and I have been talking about how, that there shouldn't necessarily need to be this ROI or this focus on results, which I think is absolutely true. I think, again, I don't think it comes from bad intentions. I think it comes from parents wanting to teach their kids good, important lessons, right? Okay, whether it's, the work ethic piece, whether it's discipline, whether it's sacrifice, whether it's different things like that. And often the easiest metric to look at whether their kid is doing all that, is doing well, are results, right? It's kind of like at school, right? The parents don't necessarily see all the behind the scenes, what their kid is doing in the classroom, how they're studying, how they're working on their essays. They see the grades. And I think that the same is true with tennis, where the parents see the results. They see the wins and losses, they see the rankings, and maybe they see a little bit more behind the scenes because maybe they're there for certain practices or training or in touch with the coach or things like that. But I think in a lot of ways, it's the easiest metric to sort of base, okay, are we moving in the right direction? Are we making progress or not? And I think, it's certainly one metric, but, if parents can get to a point where they can zoom out and sort of see the big picture a little bit more and say, okay, are we moving in the right direction? Not just based on results, but are they, is my kid making progress? Are they enjoying it? Are they developing good skills that they can use outside of the sport? So I think, again, it doesn't come from a bad place. It's just, we can sort of broaden our definition of maybe what success and progress really is, where it's not all about the result piece. So just wanted to add that in. But in terms of the knowledge of tennis piece, yeah, I would agree that I see a wide range. Certain parents that play competitively at a high level, certain parents that have never touched the racket, in the past, or maybe, haven't really been an athlete in the past, or a competitive one. And it's interesting. And I see really positive examples of parents on both sides of this, by the way. So I definitely don't think, that there's a need to have, significant experience playing yourself. But I think, yeah, having knowledge of the sport is important, and that can be obtained in different ways, right? I mean, I think, I know you brought up Richard Williams, right? The father of Serena and Venus. And I think he wasn't a serious player in the past. I don't think, I think of another example, which, people probably have their own opinions about, maybe through his book, but Andre Agassi's father wasn't a serious, player as well. But I think both examples, they really dedicated themselves to learning the sport and to helping their kids with the sport. And again, you could say what you want about either of those fathers, but I think, yeah, if somebody maybe hasn't had experience with the sport, at least taking certain steps to learn more about it. And that could be following the sport on your own, right? Following pro tennis, I think is can be a enjoyable and great way to do that, where you start learning about some of the best players in the world, start watching their matches, seeing what they do well, maybe seeing some of the challenges they have too, right? Understanding that they don't always handle pressure as well as they could, or understanding they don't always handle their emotions and frustration as well as they could, which I think can help a parent understand how hard it is that even the top five, top 10 players in the world on the men's and women's sides struggle with these things as well. So when your 15-year-old is having a tough time with this, then maybe we can be a little less judgmental about that and understand that it's hard being out there. Um, but yeah, I'll definitely see parents who, compete, play USTA tournaments, play leagues, things like that, and enjoy it, right? And I think having some sort of knowledge of the sport is critical to really help your kids navigate that process. And again, that doesn't need to mean that you're a former college or pro player or former higher level player or anything like that. It also doesn't need to mean that if you play, that if you continue to play, that you're playing at a super, super elite level. But it means that you're taking certain steps to be knowledgeable about the sport and just kind of know what's going on, both in terms of the highest level of the game, maybe the pro game, but also how the junior tennis pathway works. And we can certainly talk more about that. But I think that yeah, having some sort of knowledge in terms of the rules of the game, the different levels, and the pressures and frustrations and mental demands, I think having at least some knowledge of those different pieces is really key.
And if you haven't played before, it's not such a bad idea to try it. I think it would, it can give a parent a little bit more perspective on what their child is going through. Um, because it is a hard sport, and I think you were kind of bringing this up, Josh, is that we want to recognize that it's not easy, and we're seeing even at the top level not always the best behavior. So if they have adult brains, if they're struggling with some of the pressures to perform, then these kids who don't have adult brains, can we understand that a little bit better? Can we be a little bit more curious about why they are reacting to something the way they're reacting to it? Can we have a little bit more empathy about that? And because I think, when we get into sort of the role of the parent, I might have a slightly, maybe I have a different view about this, that really parents, the role is to be the guide. It's to be the role model for the player. It's not to be overly invested in emotional about results. We understand that tennis is hard. So as the parent, you're kind of the one guiding the player through it, understanding that it's hard, helping them navigate that. Judging it and getting overly emotional about these performances doesn't help anybody. So, in that regard, I think if we can, we need to know the sport. We need to know the rules. We need to understand that this is a very hard, lonely, often unfair sport because, what we've already said. The kids are the line judges. They're the officials. They're their own coaches. And things are going to go sideways on certain days. That's just the way it works. So the more that we know about those rules, but also the more that we're helping our child navigate that rather than inserting, because that's also knowing the game, is that inserting yourself into the match is completely inappropriate. Speaking to your child's opponent, completely inappropriate. And in fact, when I participate on a sportsmanship committee in my section of the country, when we get reports of that, there are sanctions for that behavior. You get notified that that is inappropriate, and we'll take action on that if that becomes a pattern. So it's important to know that, as a parent, what's your role in a match when you're watching. Any last thoughts about the knowledge of the game and why that's important?
No, I mean, I think that mostly covers it. I mean, I think, yeah, having knowledge about the sport allows parents to know what their involvement really can and should look like, right? Again, there's not a guidebook that every parent gets when their kid signs up for the first tournament, right? So, I don't think we can necessarily fault parents for not knowing these things from the get-go, but yeah, being able to be interested and learn about how this all works in terms of, yeah. And I think if a parent knows how the rules of tennis work and scoring and things like that, then they can better understand when their kid is frustrated, when their kid is complaining about their opponent's calls, with whatever their kid is experiencing, the parent can understand a little bit more, have maybe more empathy in that situation as well, but be able to better support their kids if you're a little bit more understanding. So yeah, that's what I just, again, taking steps towards knowing more about the sport, and there's different ways to do that, right? Following the sport, there's books, there's just attending tournaments. There's certainly a process of learning through that. But yeah, I think when parents want to learn more, it's easier for them to handle these situations in a better way.
So the next section might be the most complicated, most in terms of what parents need to be educated on, which is really understanding the developmental system. And of course, depending on where you live, it may differ from some of the stuff that we talk about, which might be more U.S. centric. So moving from, say, red ball to orange to green to yellow, understanding what are the different points of emphasis as the child gets better. Some of it might be a little bit more physical at first, technical, then maybe it becomes more mental as things develop. We start to have to deal with different cognitive development things like social comparison that can occur. So there's a lot going on here through that process of, say, it could be as early as 6 or 7 to 18 plus, long time there, a lot of different changes happening. So when I think of maybe some of the top things here, Josh, because I think there are some dangers as for parents as they go along, like if they don't understand the developmental system, is one, and I see this a lot, and actually there's a good video from Coach Life on the idea that many players play too many tournaments. So this notion that more is better, more hours on court, more tournaments, more lessons, more strength and conditioning work, it is, I think, a danger that many parents fall into, because we both know that there's diminishing returns on that. Humans, children, are not machines. They don't have infinite energy to be working so many hours on the court without breaks. And of course, they go to school, right, or have some sort of educational responsibilities, right, or obligations, maybe I should say, because they don't have much choice in the matter. They basically have to go. So there's a block number of hours per day that they can't be playing tennis. That they're doing their educational stuff. So I think maybe more is better is it can be a problem for some, maybe even early specialization. There's a lot of research on that, why that's not great for kids in terms of injuries, burnout. More is better also contributes to that. And I have some parents that I work with they fall into the trap, I think, Josh, of feeling the need to play like every L3 or play every L4, regardless of like how their child is feeling in the moment. Whether they're hurt, maybe a little bit burned out, they're still putting them in these tournaments as if that shouldn't matter. They need to go out and play and get more hours. And I think this is a kind of a quantity over quality argument, but which we know is wrong. So I think that's one of the dangers when we don't understand like the full developmental system of what was happening here. I'm just going to stop there and let's see if you want to pick up on any other topics within, just understanding the whole system.
I think with the tennis balls, right, starting with red ball, then moving to orange and green, and then eventually going to yellow ball, which is, it's sort of a standard tennis ball. Um, I have definitely seen, I imagine you've seen this too, Brian. There a lot of parents sort of view that as a result in itself. Where like, oh, my kid is in yellow ball already.
Yeah, he's 10 and
And
he's already playing, 12 and unders, right?
exactly. And I think a lot of times that process gets rushed. And I think it's a big, it's actually a really positive, important development in the last, I don't know exactly how many years, maybe 15 years, 20 years, something like that ish. Where rather than kids starting with a heavy adult racket, playing with a standard adult tennis ball on a large adult court, they're starting smaller with a lighter, decompressed ball, a smaller court, and a smaller racket. But I see oftentimes parents will really rush that process. They sort of view it as a grade almost on where their kid is in terms of that development process, where if they're somehow moving faster through it, that means that they're at a higher level or they're ready to go with yellow ball regardless of their age or actual development. And I think coaches will often get a lot of pressure about this, about, oh, my kid is ready to be playing green ball already or ready for yellow ball or whatever it may be. And I think it can be very competitive, or it can be very, I think it rather than prioritizing development, it sort of prioritizes results already, even maybe before tournaments have started. But yeah, I think focusing on quality over quantity, not trying to just, you know, do more and more and more, right? More tournaments, more training, no off days type of thing. Being able to pick your spots a little bit, trying to find the right sorts of tournaments for that player. I think sometimes people will try to play the highest level tournament they can possibly play it as well, and then they'll end up losing, the first round, of the main draw, first round of consolation, and then maybe not have the opportunity to really play, and win matches and work on skills on that side of the game. I mean, I've heard things in the past where you want to have a certain portion, maybe it's around a third of matches where you're somewhat evenly matched up, certain portion where maybe you're playing against a stronger player, and then a certain portion where you're playing against a weaker player, with the idea that in each of those scenarios, you're building different sorts of tools. And, for a lot of people, it's tough playing against players that maybe they are stronger than, or they view themselves as stronger than, or they feel like they should beat. So if we're only playing in higher level tournaments, we never necessarily get those opportunities to practice that skill, or practice maybe closing out a match, or handling the pressure of expectations of feeling like you're supposed to win.
I think that's a great point there, Josh, about we have to have players learn how to win too. Because I hear this from a lot of local coaches that parents are constantly asking for their kid to move up a group, to play with the
Hmm.
better players. And I know one of the objections to that is, well, that's not how it's going to work in tournaments. And the thing is, you might be good against a higher level player, you have less pressure, of course, but you're always just reacting to what they're doing. You're never practicing being in control of points. You're just practicing getting moved around a lot, and
Yep.
right. And so I think a good example of the pro level of this is Emma Navarro. If you look at the tournaments that she's played, say the last couple of years, there have been times where I think she's chosen, or her team has chosen with her, to play maybe a lower level event so that they could build confidence about how to learn to win. It wasn't always about playing, the 1000s or the 500s or the Grand Slams. Let's learn how to win. Let's build some confidence about that, because we're practicing your A game. And the better we make your A game, then when we get to that higher level, we're not just reacting to what somebody else is doing. You're confident enough to impose your own game. So I think it's very easy to get sucked into that trap of, oh, we have to play up, we have to play up, we have to play up. But you're actually doing a disservice there, because now the player doesn't know how to dictate and dominate points because they're never practicing that kind of thing. So I think it's a very good point. Certainly, as we have parents try to understand the system, one of the things that we know as they get better is the pressure for results tends to increase. In the United States, obviously, the idea of college tennis is present in a lot of players' minds and in a lot of parents' minds, and it creates this, what I'll call, an artificial deadline of senior year. Need to get my UTR to a certain level. I want to play for a Division I team, big team. And I call it artificial because no one in tennis peaks at 18. Unless they quit afterwards. But, like we said on our Australian Open episode, look at Madison Keys. Probably playing the best tennis of her life, physically and mentally together, at 29. That's 11 years after you're 18. So we have to understand that that's an artificial deadline, and we want to make sure that we're continuing the focus to be on why we played this in the first place. Being a good person, developing ourselves, our character, keeping this fun, reminding ourselves of the definition of what it means to be competitive. So fun, learning, improvement, always trying. Always best effort. And it's hard to keep that stuff in mind, because almost no one else is. You'll be alone pretty much in thinking this way, especially since when we talk about educating parents, this is, I think, especially true in most of the United States, there is no real system for it. It tends to be very ad hoc, maybe some conversation with coaches, maybe some conversations with the staff in your particular section of the United States, maybe your books you're reading, your own self-education, but there is, unfortunately, no system. So most people are doing it wrong. And, do you have the courage to be the one to do it a certain way and believe in what you're doing? Within a system that also increasingly puts more demands, because we'll have coaches saying learning, improvement, skill building, etc. And then you have this whole system of tournaments, rankings, and ratings that's saying, no, screw learning and improving. It's about your UTR. It's about your ranking. You've got to get that up. And like you said, that's an easy measure to go to. But it really doesn't tell you what's going on behind the scenes. Are we taking a healthy approach to development? I don't know. Just because you're number one in your section? This is a little bit different story, but I work with a very high level figure skater whose coach at times has pushed her to do things that she thinks other skaters are doing. And so the athlete I work with said, yeah, but they look miserable. I don't think I should do that. And I was like, good for you, right? Because if they look miserable, they probably are miserable. There are many, ways to become number one in your sport, but not all of them are mentally and emotionally healthy.
Hmm.
And I think, part of our role, Josh, is trying to help parents and athletes choose a mentally and emotionally healthy path to their best tennis. Um, because we could easily design training systems that are really bad for them and treat them transactionally. And they might be very successful, but we've probably done more damage to them as a whole person than we needed to in that process. So I think parents understanding their role in the developmental process, but also how it works mechanically in terms of the progressions and what to really expect, super important. Um, any other thoughts on this topic?
No, I think that mostly covers it. I mean, I think, and maybe this is a separate point, but being able to not fall into the trap of maybe specializing too early.
Yeah.
And we can look at examples of, I think there's often a push, maybe from coaches, maybe from, feeling comparisons with other players that again, we need to do more and more and more. We need to train more, we need to play more tournaments, and that means we need to specialize in this. And that means that you can't be playing these other sports or doing these other activities. And I get where that comes from. I think the research shows that early specialization is not beneficial, is actually often detrimental, and when we can look at top top pros on the men's and women's sides who have not gone that route, who have not specialized too early and have played other sports. I mean, I think of Yannick Sinner as a great example, who was a really high level skier until focusing on tennis. And I think there are a lot of benefits to playing other sports, both physically and and mentally, in terms of there's a lot that you can learn, whether it's learning footwork from a sport like soccer maybe, or hand-eye coordination, or whatever it is, or teamwork or leadership in certain sports. And I think that by giving kids the opportunity to play different sports and even do other sorts of activities, it helps them become a more well-rounded person. And ultimately, that's the goal, right? The goal is to be the best person you can be, the best tennis player you can be. And it's a lot easier to be that best version of yourself, in terms of tennis and outside of tennis, when you've had other sorts of experiences outside of just the tennis court. So I think, fighting back against that push to specialize too early, and and helping the kid develop interest and experience and expertise in other areas, I think is definitely beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. So those are essentially the high level points that were covered in the paper. I have a couple of other thoughts that I think parents should know about, but just curious, Josh, if you have anything as well, or you can feel free to comment on what I will say, kind of in my last bit here.
I'll wait to see what you
All
say. I'm
right.
excited to hear it.
Yeah, maybe not that excited, but one thing I do like to emphasize with parents is that they're performers too. They're on the performance team. And I think so. If we think of parents as performers, they also need to take care of their energy. They need to make sure they're getting good sleep, that they're eating properly, um, maybe even getting in shape to a certain degree, because we know that physical energy drives one's motivation, it drives one's ability to focus well, and it also drives your ability to manage your own emotions. And so you are a performer there, and your role again on the team is to take pressure off, to support long-term growth, to be the guide for your player, not judge for your player or being judgmental, but be the guide. Understand things are going to go wrong. Your role is to help them learn from that and be better the next time. And I think realize that the majority of players, they don't go onto the court. I would say the vast majority of players don't go onto the court saying, I can't wait not to try and I can't wait to have a bad attitude.
Hmm.
That's not the intention. So if we understand that that's not the intention, and if they then do display that, shouldn't we be more curious about what happened rather than judgmental? Like, how could you behave that way? Of course, tennis is hard. That's why, you're seeing it at the pro level. They're behaving that way. So I think the more that parents realize that they're performers, they're part of the performance team, they have a very large impact on what is going on the court. And, we're going to talk in part 3 about specifically the competition environment, pre-match, in-match, post-match, and what some of that should be. But I think I would like parents to know, as part of this process, they are performers. Jim Loehr and Tony Schwartz wrote a paper for Harvard Business School many years ago called The Corporate Athlete. And it treated people who work in corporations as athletes. And I think everybody should look into themselves as athletes. And the reason they wrote that paper was to talk about energy management. Really, a lot of the stuff that's in their book, The Power of Full Engagement, applying that to different situations. And certainly we can apply that to parents as well. So that would be one extra thing that I think I would want parents to realize in this process, is that see yourself as a performer, see yourself as an athlete. You have a major role in what happens here. And so it's really important you stay focused, you stay energized, that you control your emotions, because it's not cool if you're telling your player you need to control your emotions when you don't control your emotions after the match. And that's just hypocritical. That's not being the role model. So any thoughts on parents as performers?
It's tough to tell your kids to control your emotions if you're not, or it's tough, at least for them to listen to you, or to really respect that. And the same is true of, it's tough to tell kids not to focus so much on results, winning and losing, if that's all they ever hear from you. Right. So I think, understanding that they're, leading by example and trying to make sure that, that they're being that best example in some of these different areas, and understanding that kids are sponges and they're gonna take it in and emulate it. And so just and not that parents need to feel nervous about that, but viewing it as a part of their responsibility, right? The responsibility is not just some of the pieces that we talked about earlier, that financial piece, the time commitment. It's also, the behavior and your actions, and understanding that, that piece often has a large impact in terms of how the kid ends up acting and handling different situations.
For sure. So that's our episode on the educational needs of parents. So just to sort of summarize that, we talked about why tennis, reasons for getting involved in tennis. We talked about the financial and time demands of it, having a knowledge of the game as being important, understanding the developmental system, and there's a lot to that. And I think I didn't mention this, but there are also some consultants who help parents navigate through that. So that could even be something to look into wherever you live. And then finally, we talked about parents as performers. Next episode, we'll talk more about the competition needs that players have, that they want to get from their parents, and how parents should handle pre-match, in-match, and post-match. So with that, that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.